Chapter 6. The Cardiff Giant. One of my ancestors, Miss Armitage began, was an aristocrat in old Tsarist Russia. She was very wealthy and owned beautiful things. Much to her family's dismay, she fell in love with an American and came to this country to marry him. They settled in Cooperstown in a large house with attractive grounds. Later, the place burned down. "What a shame," Bess put in. Yes, it was, Miss Armitage agreed. But long before the fire, the woman had one child, a beautiful little girl. She brought her daughter up as if she were a princess, and even imported a child's royal coach from Russia. Her own little pony pulled it. As Miss Armitage paused, Nancy smiled. "This sounds like some of the fairy tales I used to read." The visitor nodded. "Indeed it does, and the whole tale fascinates me." "What's the rest of the story?" George asked. "You haven't told us yet about the bay. Where does that come in?" Miss Armitage's eyes twinkled. "I'll get to that. In fact, I dislike telling the next part of the story because it is sad. The lovely little girl died very suddenly. Her mother was heartbroken and almost went out of her mind. Madame insisted that she and her husband move and that every object which brought back memories of the child were to be sold or given away. The particular object which reminded the mother of her beloved daughter was the royal coach. It was painted in gold and white and had birds and flowers carved on it. Madame felt that no one else should use it, yet she didn't want it to be destroyed. Finally, she requested that it be put into a waterproof box and lowered into the bay. The whole thing was to be kept very quiet. Everyone agreed it was a sad story indeed. Then George said, "Evidently, somebody didn't keep the secret. How did you learn about it?" Miss Armitage said that when the child's nurse, Maud Jason, became an old lady with a failing memory, she had told the tale, but no one believed it. That is, no one but myself. I came across pieces of a faded, torn letter in an old book which I received when the books of the little girl's mother were passed to members of the family. I happened to inherit this one. "Did you by any chance lose one of the pieces?" Nancy asked her. "Yes, I did," Miss Armitage replied. "And it was an important part of the message. I think I lost it on the water yesterday morning. Foolishly, I was carrying the letter in a small pocket." Nancy stood up and excused herself for a minute. She went to get the paper she had found and showed it to Miss Armitage. The woman was amazed. "This is what I lost! Where did you find it?" Nancy told her, then said, "Miss Armitage, I've puzzled over the meaning of it. Your story is fascinating and explains the mystery." The woman said that her reason for wanting to retrieve the child's beautiful royal coach was to present it to the Fenimore Museum. "If the water did not get to it and the coach is intact, I think it would be a lovely addition to the historical exhibits. Thousands of people could enjoy it. And it would be a rare piece," Aunt Eloise added. "I doubt that there are very many like it in the world." George asked Miss Armitage how she hoped to locate the box containing the child's coach. "Either by feeling around with my stilts or by a long pole, which I sometimes use. I thought if I located the box and could prove that the story is true, then I could hire some divers to bring it up." Miss Armitage looked searchingly from one face to another. Finally, she said, "If this mystery intrigues you, Nancy, how about solving it for me? Since you rescued me, you girls must be wonderful swimmers. You should be able to locate the coach." Nancy accepted the challenge with alacrity, and Bess and George said they wanted to help in the search too. "But you must promise to keep it a secret," Miss Armitage insisted. "We promise," said the girls in unison, and smilingly gave a mock salute. The woman stood up. She wished the girls luck, then asked if one of them would drive her car home. "I still feel a little shaky," she said. "I will," said Nancy. "Let's all go to town," she suggested. "We'll need scuba diving equipment for our search, and I can't wait to start." Aunt Eloise begged off, saying she had letters to write. George drove Miss Armitage's car, which the woman had parked on the road not far from Mirror Bay Bide-a-Wee. Since her home was on the opposite side of the lake, the two cars were driven through Cooperstown, then out Route 80, which ran along the water. When they reached the attractive rented cottage, Bess carried the stilts inside. For the first time, Miss Armitage laughed out loud. "How foolish I've been! I think I ought to give away those stilts. To think of all the trouble I put you girls to and wasn't accomplishing a thing myself." "Don't worry about that," Nancy said quickly. "And please keep the stilts. Sometime when you're feeling strong, I want you to give us a demonstration." "I will, if you'll all try them," Miss Armitage said. After a brief pause, she added, "By the way, you aren't far from the Farmers' Museum. That's a great place to visit. You know who's there? The Cardiff Giant." "Who's he?" George asked. The retired schoolteacher would not reveal any more. "You're so close now, why don't you find out for yourselves?" "Maybe we will," Nancy replied. "But first we want to shop for scuba equipment." The girls returned to the center of Cooperstown in Nancy's car and parked near a restaurant. Yo was just coming out of it. He seemed very glad to see them. Grinning, he asked, "Have you met the Green Man yet?" To his surprise, their answer was yes. "Really? Tell me about it," he said. The girls related their experience and told about the man saying there was trouble at Bide-a-Wee cabin. "It wasn't true. It was only an excuse to get us away," George said angrily. "Yo, have you any idea at all what's going on up in those woods?" "No," the young man replied, "but I'd like to find out. To tell the truth, though, I don't think that green guy is fooling around. He wouldn't hesitate to harm any of us." "Then," said Bess, "I, for one, will stay out of his reach." Nancy changed the subject and asked Yo where they could buy scuba equipment. He told them. Then George inquired if he knew about the Cardiff Giant at the Farmers' Museum. "Oh, yes," Yo replied. "Wait until you see that moth-eaten old Indian." "Tell us about him," Bess urged. Yo grinned but refused. Finally, the girls left him. Nancy said that before going to the sports shop, she would like to stop at the post office up the street. "I want to see if there are any letters for us sent to general delivery." Several were handed over to her. The one Nancy tore open first was from Ned Nickerson, her favorite date. As soon as she finished reading it, Nancy exclaimed, "Girls, listen to this!" She read part of the letter aloud. It said, "Now I can tell you a surprise which your Aunt Eloise and I have arranged. She invited Bert, Dave, and me to come up to your cabin. We'll be there this weekend." "How super!" Bess cried out. "Best news I've heard in ages." "Great," George commented with a grin. Bert Eddleton was a special friend of hers, and Dave Evans dated Bess. Nancy went on. "Ned also says, be sure to have a mystery waiting for us." The three girls giggled. "Mystery?" Bess exclaimed. "We're full of them." Nancy remarked that she would give up her room and bunk with her aunt so the three boys could use hers. "It's lucky there are 3 beds in it." The girls went back to the street and walked to the shop where scuba diving equipment could be purchased. After choosing some, they went to the car and set off for the Farmers' Museum on the west side of the lake. The exhibits were housed in a huge barn and several smaller buildings. The adjoining grounds were laid out as a reproduction of a colonial village with separate offices for a lawyer, a doctor, and a printer. There also were a pharmacist's shop with old-fashioned candies, a blacksmith's, a pioneer homestead, a schoolhouse, and a church. In the huge barn, the girls were intrigued by demonstrations of broom making, spinning, and weaving. They walked all the way through the building. In a nearby shed stood a large, unusual-looking vehicle. "What's that?" Bess asked, perplexed. When the girls drew closer, they could read a sign saying that the vehicle was a snow roller. It was horse-drawn and pulled what looked like a tremendous barrel nearly the width of an old-time country road. George remarked, "Clearing away snow in olden days must have really been a task. Think of how easy it is today with motorized equipment." "Now let's go see the Cardiff giant," Nancy suggested. Bess pleaded, "But first I want to buy some of that old-fashioned candy." Before Nancy and George could decide which to do, a cry rang out loud and clear in the big barn. "Stop! Thief!" End of chapter 6.